Palestine solidarity at heart is not a human rights issue. It's a political question. Of course, human rights comes into it, as we can see today, in all its barbarity, but it's a political question. Zionism was the adopted policy of the first British ruling class, and now the American and European ruling classes. And they don't love Zionism because they love Jews. They love Zionism because of what Israel does on their behalf, or what they would like it to do on their behalf. That's why all Joe Biden's red lines seem to disappear into the mist. Because at the end of the day, you can't really kick your watchdog too much, otherwise it may stop barking.
So if you think back, there was the original Zionism of Herzl, then there was the revisionist Zionist of Jabotinsky, and now there seems to be a more religious version. But would you say that there is a red thread that goes through all of them?
Yes, I mean, Zionism has taken on many forms, but it's remained the same beast throughout. I mean, remember, the first Nakba was not carried out by the revisionist Zionists or the right-wing Zionists. It was carried out by the left-wing, the socialist Zionists, yeah? The kibbutzim, who believed in equality. But they didn't admit Arabs to their kibbutz, of course. And they were established on the rubble of the Arab villages. So, I mean, Zionism has always had running through it the idea of a Jewish state. And a Jewish state on someone else's land inevitably meant the expulsion of of the indigenous population. It wasn't unique. It happened in the United States and Australia and goodness knows where. But Zionism has always been the same creature, which is today why. I mean, there is a wall-to-wall Zionist consensus in support of what is happening, the genocide in Gaza. In essence, Zionism has always been the same, but it's taken different forms. But today, there is no need for Labour or left-wing socialist Zionism, and it's gone further and further to the right. But the alliance with the religious, the kind of religious fundamentalism, was always there in Zionism, even if it didn't manifest itself very clearly. Very early on, it made a pact with the religious Zionism. Zionism adopted the symbols of the Jewish religion, in particular the Star of David, which was a relatively minor Jewish symbol. So it's always been there. But today, I think it is pretty clear now what Zionism is. And I think we have to be clear as well.
Thank you. Something that I particularly admire about you, and which comes out quite clearly in the film, is what you describe as your thick skin. Yeah. You seem not to be affected by all the rotten eggs or tomatoes that people throw at you. And I would like to contrast that with the time when Jeremy Corbyn was leader of the party, that apparently he was personally affected by all the insults that, of course, unjustified incident, but he seemed to be affected. How do you think we can persuade the solidarity movement to develop a thick skin like yours?
Well, I don't think I'm unique in having a thick skin.
No.
And I think people have to develop it because otherwise they won't survive. Personally, I mean, I was coming up on the train and I looked at Twitter, and a woman called Rania Khalek, who interviewed me for, I think it's Breakthrough News. She interviewed me, she was in Lebanon, she's a Lebanese woman. And she's just had a confrontation with Piers Morgan. I haven't watched the confrontation, but she's a feisty woman, is Rania. And then you should have seen the Zionist tweets aimed at her. Wish you get raped, this and that, cunt this, etc. I mean, absolutely vile and disgusting. I just tweeted back, you must have hurt them a lot if that's what they're coming out with. So if they attack you personally, it's because inside they're hurting because what you say is true. So you have to develop a thick skin because, well, psychologically you wouldn't survive. And of course, all this stuff about anti-Semitism and so on, yes, of course, why do they accuse people of anti-Semitism? Because they know being anti-racist, it's a particularly vile charge to make, given the history. But, of course, it's not true. So you just have to learn to live with it and to deal with them in their own measure. So usually when people say I'm a self-hater, I say, no, I love myself, but I don't have a great regard for you, I'm afraid.
Okay, can I have any questions from the floor?
If I have a general question which can't have any general answer, then what are the various pathways by which Zionist Jews become anti-Zionist?
I mean, I became an anti-Zionist in essence because I became a Marxist. And universalism and exclusivism are diametrically opposed. But how do Zionist Jews become anti-Zionists? I don't know. I mean, for some of them, like Peter Baynard, it's because they've actually thought through what it is that they believe in and come to the conclusion that if they believe in certain egalitarian ideals, then they are incompatible with Zionism. But for many of the kids on university campuses at the moment, Jewish students, then it's simply because they could see the reality of what Israel has become. Israel is no longer hiding what it does, because when I grew up, I mean, Israel was very good at hasbara, propaganda. And as there was a discussion with Lincoln and someone else, and they were saying how badly Israel does the hasbara, which is why they want to get rid of TikTok, because you see overwhelmingly social media has anti-Israel, anti-Zionist memes and videos and so on and so forth. I think the reality of what Israel is doing is the best answer to it, and they're no longer hiding what they're doing. And the United States is basically not justifying what they're doing either, which is why actually you're getting massive dissent within the State Department and other echelons of the US government, who are worried that they can no longer clothe themselves. They're morally bankrupt and naked. So I think those are the main ways, but of course individuals will have different pathways.
You said that you left the PSC. Can you explain why?
Yeah. Well, I left it twice, in fact. Even though I had helped found it. The first time was in 1993, over the Oslo Accords. I was in a very distinct minority. And I wrote, in fact, it's a debate in National Labour Briefing. I'm going to reprint it on my blog. And nearly everyone in the solidarity movement was saying, oh, great. A Palestinian state is around the corner, Israel's going to make peace, the lion and the lamb are going to sit down with each other. And I said, no, I mean, the Oslo Accords doesn't even give the Palestinians a state, if you look at the wording. Really what it's doing is substituting the faces of Israeli soldiers and police for Palestinians. So I said, you've got to look at Zionism. Zionism doesn't exist to hand out part of what it considers its patrimony. So I resigned then. Let's say I was in a distinct minority. Then the second time was actually in 2022, when PSC adopted a new constitution and got rid of opposition to Zionism. And I thought, this is crazy. It's like the anti-apartheid movement saying, well, as long as we have human rights in South Africa, we'll accept apartheid. I mean, apartheid was the equivalent of Zionism. So you cannot oppose what's happening to the Palestinians unless you oppose the ideology which has caused their dispossession and oppression. So I felt I had no choice but to resign. And I only hope the PSC will have a rethink now and realise that there is no peace to be made with a Jewish state. A Jewish state has no right to exist. States don't have a right to exist. Human beings have a right to exist. And as long as there's a Jewish state, you'll have an apartheid state. and a very expansionist state and a genocidal state. And so people have got to stand up and say those things loud and clear. And that's why I resigned.
Thank you very much, Tony, for a fascinating film, and congratulations again to Helena, the filmmaker. A lot of that resonated very strongly with me. I followed a very similar personal and political trajectory to yourself. I was brought up in a very strong Zionist family. But anyway, what comes across from the film, as indeed from all the reports that we read, is, well, first of all, the psychopathic nature of Israelis and Israeli society. It's a pathological society, obviously based on racism. Just to hear those young women talking about the pleasure they get from killing Palestinians, these people should be locked up. Actually, they're mentally ill, and the whole society is a pathological society. But I just want to take up a couple of brief points. I don't want to go into the point about the PSC because we can have a separate discussion about that. But what occurs to me from my own research is looking back at, the Zionist narrative says that Jews have always only ever been persecuted. And this is completely false. It's completely false because for hundreds of years, first of all, they say that the Romans expelled the Jews. The Romans never expelled the Jews. The majority of Jews were traders, travelers, living outside ancient Israel, even at the time of the Roman conquest. And, in the time of the Holy Roman Empire and medieval Europe, Jews fulfilled important roles in the court. They were respected. There were problems with rival Christian merchants, but because they were merchants, traders, travelers, they developed this internationalist outlook. Zionism is a nationalist movement, is an aberration from the real Jewish historical tradition. And therefore we reject Zionism, partly, of course, because of what it does to the Palestinians, but because it's a travesty in terms of the real Jewish historical tradition. Final point is we need an urgent discussion about how can Palestine be free. And that's what I think often lacking in discussions. Not tonight, I must say. Israel is not like South Africa. Israel is worse than South Africa. The Palestinians do not have economic power in the way that the black South African working class had economic power. Therefore, they depend on international solidarity, our solidarity, but crucially, they depend on the solidarity of the Arab masses. And this is the thing that we have to explore. For example, the Egyptian workers, the textile workers who went on strike, nearly won fantastic victory in 2011. I don't want to go on and on, but that is where we have to look to the important solidarity that can help liberate Palestine. Thank you.
With a comment? There wasn't really a question.
Well, firstly, can I thank Helen for making this film? I'm very grateful to her. Secondly, to say that, yes, I agree with Zabi. I say in my book that if there had been no Palestinians, if Zionism had colonized an empty Pacific island, I would still have opposed it because of what Zionism is and what it represents, which is a bankrupt, amoral form of nationalism, which is atavistic in its character. It really is a contradiction of all the Jewish traditions. When you think about famous Jews and what they stood for, Marx, Freud, Spinoza, etc., Heinrich Heine. Zionism, what does it offer? This kind of nationalism which deprecates anybody else. It fixes on parts of the Bible which justify, like Joshua, it ignores the prophets because they speak of justice and welcome for the stranger and so on. So Zionism has to be repudiated, and it's false prophets like the chief Rabbi Mervis at the same time. So I absolutely support what you say. And also, as you say, it's not true that Jews have always been persecuted. There's sometimes been oppressors of the peasants, for example. They were persecuted and persecutors, just as they are now today. The myth of internal anti-Semitism. What it really means is that the non-Jewish DNA is inherently anti-Semitic. I mean, that in itself is a racist idea, but
Yeah.
Zionism and racism go together.
You're still waiting for a trial, is that right? For terrorism?
Under the Terrorism Act,
Under
yes.
the Terrorism Act.
Yeah, yeah.
Where do you think this is going to go? How's it going to end?
Well, that is a very big question, of course. I mean, we've seen over the last 2 or 3 years an increasing number of acts of parliament whose sole purpose is to clamp down on the right to protest, the Counter-Terrorism and Security Act, the Police Crime and Sentencing Bill, I think 2 Public Order Acts, increasingly stringent to deal with direct action and protests from groups like Just Stop Oil, Palestine Action, Extinction Rebellion, and so on. So we are seeing a creeping authoritarianism in our society, and of course, Keir Starmer, who's really a state agent, deep state. I mean, there's nothing that he doesn't like about Tories, really, except he's not leading them, I guess. I mean, you have that consensus which crosses into the Labour Party. So we are, in a sense, in changed times. So I'm hoping that the left is going to be able to get its act together, because we do need to resist. And the use of terrorism, the Terrorism Act, it was in 2021, they prescribed, Hamas had already been prescribed its military wing, they prescribed its political wing. It was just a decision of the Home Secretary, Sajid Javid. The justification for it in the legislation is paper thin. So if they go ahead with a prosecution, at the moment I'm on bail under investigation, as I have been for the last 4 months, then I will be fighting it on a free speech basis, that they are using the Anti-Terrorism Act in order to suppress free speech. It's got nothing to do with terrorism. It's got everything to do with they don't like the things that I and other people say, because there's at least 30 other people who are in my position. I'm not unique by any means. So it's a decision by the government to pressurise the police to implementing this obscure clause in Section 12(1)(a) of the Terrorism Act 2000. So, yes, I mean, the price of freedom is eternal vigilance, I guess. Well, I don't have a crystal ball that I did. I did say in the film, quite clearly, Israel's intention is ethnic cleansing. I mean, anyone who pretends otherwise, like the Americans, are simply lying. There is no other explanation for destruction of every single university, for the razing to the ground of Al-Shifa, Al-Nasser, and all the other hospitals. They're out to destroy anything remotely akin to civilization in Palestinian society. That must mean that they want to get rid of the Palestinians altogether. But I don't think they will succeed, not least because they find it extremely difficult in the battle against Hamas and the resistance. I don't believe for 1 minute the casualties figures. I think they probably are in the region of 2,000 to 3,000 dead, and probably 3 or 4 times that number wounded. We know they've been covering up those figures. Haaretz, back in, I think it was December or January, it went round the hospitals of Israel to find out how many wounds had been taken in. And in just one hospital, the figures were greater than the total the military had given out so far, which was then about 1,500. That was just one hospital. So clearly Israel is paying a higher price. And figures in the military are now saying we can't win this war. That this goal of getting rid of, exterminating Hamas is not possible. So I think they're beginning to realise that their reach is only so far, coupled with the, if you like, war of attrition on the northern border, which has meant the northern settlements and towns have been vacated. So I think Israel is finding, without the United States, it is weaker than it thinks. I mean, the myth of Israeli invincibility, I think, is slowly disappearing. The thing it's rested on is political support in the West. And that's something we have to erode. And that is our job as a solidarity movement. And I have to say this, that one of the arguments against the solidarity movement adopting a clear position in support of one state is that the Palestinians are divided. Well, this is reminiscent to the arguments of the Vietnam Solidarity Campaign, when the Viet Cong at a certain stage accepted the continuation of the South Vietnamese state because of their own weakness at that stage. And that's true of the Palestinians. In their weakness, they may well say that we will accept it. But what they say and we say are two different things, because we are addressing a different audience. We don't have to make concessions. Palestinians might have to. But it doesn't help them if we also make those concessions. So I think that is the point that we make, that we have to be clear that the only solution is a single democratic secular state. How you get there, I obviously can't foresee. But I think a precondition is the overthrow of the existing Arab regimes in the region. I have no doubt that genocide in Gaza could be stopped in a day if the Arab regimes, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Oman, Qatar, said no more oil is coming out until you do this.
So I'm interested in your comment. Is Zionism another form of fascism, just in another dress or form?
Do I think that Zionism is a form of fascism? No, I don't. I'll tell you why. Fascism came about in Spain, in Italy, in Nazi Germany. And one of the preconditions of it, or the reasons for it, was the destruction of the organisations of the working class. Israel is a settler colonial state. That doesn't mean it's a nicer kind. If anything, it could be worse. I mean, America exterminated the native Indians. It was settler colonialism. It wasn't fascism. So the same as with Israel. It's just a different form. Fascism is a particular political variant, if you like, of capitalism in crisis. In Israel, the Jewish working class organisations are not destroyed. In many ways, they're quite strong. So there is that difference, and I think it's important not to just use the term fascism as a means of saying I don't like something. I think there is a difference. So I don't think that Israel is a fascist state. It's a settler colonial. Individuals within it, I would say, are fascists. In fact, they're self-proclaimed fascists, like Smotrich, Ben Gvir, Miri Regev. They call themselves fascists. But is the state itself fascist? Well, it may take on certain characteristics, but it's primarily a settler colonial state. Settler colonialism isn't better than fascism. Often it's worse. What we had in Zionism, we first had labour Zionism, simply because the most efficient method of colonising the country was collective colonisation. And for that purpose, the collective settlements were set up, the kibbutzim, which staked out the borders of the future Jewish state, and that was their purpose. But as time has gone by, the institutions of labour Zionism have withered away. They're no longer necessary. There's no longer the need for those institutions. The kibbutzim have become private enterprise institutions. So you had that transformation as revisionism has taken power. I mean, in its turn, it's made its peace, if you like, or been taken over in a sense by the messianic fundamentalists. Because one of the problems in Israel is you have an incompatibility between those who see themselves primarily as Israeli first and those who see themselves as Jewish first. And they are about 50-50 split. And we saw this, a manifestation of this, before October the 7th, with the massive demonstrations on the street about the nature of the state, because the right wing, the messianics, want to replace civil law with halacha, with Jewish law. That for them is the ultimate goal, as well as establishing a third temple. There is an irony, because if there was no Palestinians, I imagine there would be a civil war within the so-called Jewish state. The irony is that the Palestinians keep them together because they focus their energy on the enemy outside. I mean, that is the irony of Zionism. It's Jewish state is only kept together by the Palestinians, but they don't, of course, realise it. I think we have to get across quite clearly. I mean, you might have seen on TV last night that preacher called Suella Braverman. She professes a horror at anti-Semitism, and this is a woman who's made racism into a trademark. She dreamt of sending refugees and asylum seekers to Rwanda. I mean, if anyone represented what racism is, then it's Suella Braverman. But she's, afflicted by anti-Semitism, and so is Donald Trump, so are most of the right. So we have to call out the hypocrisy that they're not really concerned with anti-Semitism. What they're concerned is with using Jews as the alibi and the excuse for the existence of the Israeli state. It's not about Jews. I mean, many Jews think it is, but they're very much mistaken. But stupidity is not unknown in such a community.
Where do you think this is going? Because we go on these big demonstrations, we have local demonstrations which focus on the various things like councillors, on Barclays Bank and so forth. What are your views on how this movement should build? Because I think there's some amazingly good things about the solidarity that you get on this movement, in just lots of different types of people on it. Individual trade unionists, socialists, Asian people, particular Muslim people, and that's a fantastic thing. But where do we go next?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I support self-determination for the Palestinians. If you were to ask the Palestinians, what would you prefer, 2 states or 1 state? I guarantee you 99% would say 1 state. But of course, many Palestinians, though it's not a majority state, will go for 2 states because they think that's the only thing they can achieve. But if they were free to decide, then I have no doubt they would want 1 state. But it's not simply a question of that. It's something much more fundamental. You see, Palestine Solidarity has got all these union affiliations to it. And yet, when the crunch has come, they've meant very little. Some unions have been good, but my own union, Unite, which in Britain and Ireland is the largest union, has been absolutely abysmal. And we've had a campaign over Sharon Graham, who's basically a Zionist. And what is the problem in the unions? I'll tell you, every single union has support for 2 states. And that has allowed, when all the charges of anti-Semitism arrived, for them to say, oh, well, we have to both sides it. We have to both support the Palestinians and support the Jews, as they call it. And I think we need to be very, very clear. A 1-state solution means 1 single state. It doesn't mean a Jewish state. And so when the Zionists say, oh, well, there's only 1 Jewish state in the world, my response is, yes, but that's 1 too many. And that should be our response as well. A Jewish state is no protection for Jews. It never has been and it never will. On the contrary, the main cause of anti-Semitism today is the existence of Israel, I have no doubt.
Hi, thank you. This might be a naive question. Can you explain a bit more why you think America supports Israel? Is it because, it's an evangelical vote, or is it for American bases?
Thanks. No, I mean, it's not a naive question. It's a very fundamental question. It's a question many people are asking. I quoted Joe Biden on why, if Israel didn't exist, it would have to be invented. I could have quoted Alexander Haig, who was Ronald Reagan's Secretary of State back in, 18 to 88, I think it was, when he described Israel as the United States unsinkable aircraft carrier in the region. In other words, it's always been the dream of the imperialists, and Napoleon was the first, and you can go back even further than him. And then all the British imperialists, Palmerston, Disraeli, Shaftesbury, etc. They all wanted to see a Jewish state. The way they rationalise it is, of course, in terms of religious ideology. But religion is really not the cause. It is, I think, the rationalisation of their material interests. They wanted a stable settler state on the banks of the Suez, which at that time, of course, was the main route to India. And India was the jewel in the crown of the British Empire. Of course, it's not today, but it's still a very important route. And the whole region has taken on the added significance of being one of the major oil producers. So they wanted Israel as, if you like, a bastion of reaction in the Middle East. I'm just reading a book now. I mean, when Britain had problems, and France did, over Nasser's nationalisation of the Suez Canal, the first country they turned to was Israel. People may remember they concocted a scheme by which Israel would attack Egypt, and then Britain and France would step in to separate the warring partners, telling them both to withdraw. Of course, Israel didn't mind withdrawing because it didn't belong to them in the first place. But for Egypt, that was obviously would have been a defeat, but that came rather unstuck. And actually, Suez was the beginning of the slavish followership of British imperialism with United States imperialism. But at heart, it's strategic. And one of our jobs, and the Palestinian resistance, of course, is to make the price of Israel too high for imperialism to keep paying it. So it's a combination. I can't forecast exactly how things will turn out, but I agree with Ilan Pappy. We are seeing the beginning of the end of that Zionism. And our job is to hasten that end.
I'm just wondering about your opinion on the impact of the Gaza war on Jewish people around the world.
It's very difficult to say, but it's very clear from, I think, both Britain and the United States that increasing number of Jewish people are standing out and saying, not in my name. In the United States, I think something like 15 out of 80 of the students initially arrested at Columbia University were Jewish. So there's been a very high Jewish participation. There's also been a very low participation in Zionist assemblies and so on. So the Zionists are not able to mobilize on the streets like they used to be able to in New York when thousands came out for Israel Day. So I think most Jews are embarrassed by what Israel is doing. But of course, we only hear the loudest and the shrillest voices because the mass media will choose to listen to Rabbi Mervis's and the Board of Deputies rather than the many Jews who harbour their doubts or more about it. But I have no doubt that anti-Zionism as a Jewish strand is here to stay and it can only grow stronger. And I think Zionism, I mean, you see the desperate attempts, I mean, the attacks on the encampments in the United States, UCL in Los Angeles, in Oxford here, and against SOAS by small bands of Zionists. I mean, the reason for that is because they know that they cannot mobilise on the streets. And the shrill attempt, I mean, the absurd, the farcical attempt, if you remember, of Gideon Falter, of this campaign against anti-Semitism, he kept walking the wrong way up 2 times because he wanted to be called out. I mean, that was an act of desperation, to be quite honest. And it actually shows how weak they are. He must be getting furious at the fact that hundreds of thousands of people come onto the streets and they can't mobilise hardly anyone. They called one demonstration, they said it was 50,000, but looking at it, it didn't seem 5,000. So clearly they are finding it very, very difficult. Doesn't mean they're not dangerous because of that. They will resort to terrorism and violence in a way that they wouldn't have done in the past. That's because they're seen to be losing. But I have no doubt that what Israel is doing is draining away political support in the West. And that means amongst Jewish people as well. For that, we should be grateful.